Vivek Ramaswamy thinks that the Joe Biden campaign is going to come to an end a lot sooner than you think. And wait till you hear who he thinks is going to replace him.
I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Vivek Ramaswamy, entrepreneur, former 2024 presidential candidate, and author of Truths, coming out in September. Vivek, thank you so much for joining me.
It's good to be on.
We had a historic presidential debate on Thursday between current President Joe Biden, former President Donald Trump, and almost a week later, we're still dealing with the fallout from President Biden's debate performance. People now are calling for him to step aside, drop out of the race. You have been saying he's not going to be the Democrats' nominee for months now. Can you talk about why you've been saying that?
I've been saying that for nearly a year and a half now. I said it for much of the campaign trail last year, though it was dismissed as a crazy idea last year. It has now become the mainstream view of what's going to happen. And the reason is, first of all, I think most organizations, including political parties, tend to do whatever's in their best long-run interest. So I think that the plan as it's played out, not that it's been in some smoke-filled backroom plot, but just the incentives match exactly what you're seeing play out, which is a late switch would actually be to the advantage of Democrats. That's the hard reality, where they'd rather put somebody up late, still in the honeymoon phase with the public when the election occurs in November, but without having the chance to go through that scrutiny phase. To anybody who's been watching this for a long time, it's been plain as day that Joe Biden does not have the cognitive faculties to serve as the U.S. president. It's sad. Many people across this country do suffer from dementia. It does appear like Joe Biden is likely to be one of them, but that doesn't entitle him to be the president of the United States. To the contrary, I'm really worried about, even right now in the lead up to the election, who exactly is running the country. It's been unclear who's running the country for the last year and a half. I think it's certainly unclear who's running it right now. But I do continue to believe, as I have for the last 16 months, that Joe Biden will not be the nominee. And I think in some ways this election, for that reason, hasn't really even kicked into full gear.
The thing that concerns me about that is that Donald Trump doesn't know who the heck he's going against. He doesn't know how to prepare for them. But the Democrats know exactly who they're up against. Donald Trump, they got the same playbook. He's not fit for the nuclear codes. He's a disaster to the country. We're so divided. That's going to be their playbook. But Donald Trump, they could throw in anybody. Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama. So he's got to be prepared for all of them. But what I think Donald Trump's going to do instead, he's just going to focus on the country, how he's going to help Americans. I don't think he's focused on who they throw in, because at the end of the day, Americans are only going to care about which candidate helps their life the most. And if Donald Trump just sticks to that, and he's not concerned about who the Democratic candidate is, I think he's going to win in a landslide.
Most of public policy today. It's interesting, even just last week, the Supreme Court did rein in a good amount of that administrative power. But whether you want to call it the deep state, the administrative state, the fourth branch of government, or the unelected bureaucrats, that's, I think, the class of people, particularly around Joe Biden, who are really running the show. And they've really just put up a president really as a symbol, as a kind of puppet for a machine underneath it that's really driving most of the policy decisions. And so, that's not conspiratorial or accusational. I think it's just a descriptive reality of how Washington, D.C. works today. The people we elect to run the government are not the ones actually running the government. And nowhere is that more true than in the case of Joe Biden, who is only nominally, in some thin nominal sense, the president of the United States. I don't think in any real, actual, true sense, he really is even the president, which is part of why I've long advised Republicans and said so as a candidate myself, that the way that we need to win this election isn't just by criticizing Biden. Frankly, Biden isn't going to be the nominee, as I've said for the last year and a half. The way we're going to actually win not only this election, but revive this country is by defining who we are and what we stand for and what are those values that we're actually advancing rather than just worried about the candidate who we're running against.
Amen.
If you don't think President Biden is going to be the nominee, who do you think is going to replace him?
Look, again, I think you got to track the incentives and the psychology of the party that's at issue here. In this case, that's the Democratic Party. There's an uncomfortable truth. Kamala Harris was not qualified to be the vice president. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucus. She was wildly unpopular, and I think egregiously unqualified to serve as the vice president. She's failed on every initiative she's been given, most notably for border security, where that's been one of the real black marks on the Biden presidency, among many black marks on that presidency. Nonetheless, they went with her for one reason: identity politics. Don't take it from me. Look at what many Democrats said at the time for her basis for being put into that position, that she was a woman of color. Their words, not mine. Well, if they put her in that position based on identity politics, then I think it's going to be very difficult for them to pass her over unless they actually admit they were wrong before, which is impossible for them to do. And so I think it's either got to be Kamala Harris or somebody else who checks those same boxes, like Michelle Obama. And I think the latter possibility, people discount it. I think it's actually more likely than most people expect, because that would also be the type of figure that rises above the otherwise personal competitive forces that a lot of other ambitious people who might want to run for president in the Democratic Party would have competing against each other. I think Michelle Obama does rise above that fray while still paying homage to the temple of identity politics that resulted in Kamala Harris's elevation in the first place.
When we go back to who actually runs the country, it reminds me of a quote from Vladimir Putin. He said he saw 4 or 5 U.S. presidents during his time. They all came in with grand plans and promises for the American people, yet very few were actually able to fulfill their promises because the people in the background, the shadow government. Vladimir Putin said this because he understands how the American system is ran. Like when Trump came in, he didn't know about these people. How could he possibly know about it? He was going in blind. So when it comes to who's going to be Joe Biden's replacement, this is just going to be a figurehead. This person's not going to have any actual power. There are going to be people in the background who control this person. So who do I think it's going to be? I think this is going to be Michelle Obama, because why would they not pick her? Michelle Obama's going to say something like, I couldn't risk Donald Trump becoming president again. I had to step in and do something. What happened to the days when we had accomplished generals or some of the wealthiest people in the world wanted to become president because they were successful in their fields? But now we're just picking somebody because they check a box and they're married to Obama?
She doesn't want to run, but who do you think has the better chance of beating Trump? Because both Biden and Harris, in a recent CNN poll, are losing to Trump, but the gap between Harris and Trump is smaller. So who do you think is the Democrats' best option?
Look, that's for the Democratic Party to decide. The reality is I think President Trump is on a firm course to not only win this election, but to potentially win this election in a unifying landslide like we haven't seen in this country in a generation since Reagan in 1980 and 1984. And I do think this country is in bad need of that type of unifying result. We're used to these razor-thin margins all the way from the 2000 election on down, that I do think has divided this country and created an artificial perception of division. When, in fact, when I travel this country now, a lot of people in communities that would have otherwise supposedly gone Democrat, urban inner city communities, Black Americans, young Americans, even people who are working class Americans that might have historically voted Democrat, I think they're sick and tired of the way those policies have left them holding the bag, particularly economically. And I also think that this scourge of illegal mass migration into this country has left Americans of every color and every partisan affiliation worse off for that illegal migration crisis and the wave of crime in the cities across this country. So I think President Trump has an opportunity to make this a unifying landslide victory, irrespective of who the Democrats put up. But that comes back to the cautionary note I offered earlier. We can't fall into the trap of obsessing over who the nominee is going to be on the other side. I think we have to do the harder work of looking in the mirror and asking ourselves, who are we and what do we actually stand for? Not just as Republicans, but as Americans. And I think if President Trump does that, I think he's on track to already doing it. I think he did a great job at the debate, and a lot of his reasons that track. Republicans up and down the ballot, I think, are going to be able to unite this country in a landslide.
Like you said at the beginning of the conversation, your call or prediction, rather, that President Biden won't be the nominee was dismissed for months as a sort of fringe talk. The past week, that has become way more mainstream. On a campaign call today, President Biden said in no uncertain terms, reportedly, that he is staying in the race until the very end. So what do you think of his insistence there?
He has to
Well,
say
he might be right about that, and that the very end is just coming very soon. So that's, I think, the reality. The longer they wait, though, every day between now and late August, you could argue it actually helps the Democrats. As I said, the later that swap out takes place, the less time there is for scrutiny of that candidate, the more likely it is that the candidate is in a honeymoon phase with the public, whoever it is that they put up. It's akin to the feeling that a tortured prisoner might have to his liberator. That would be the attitude of much of the public, certainly aided by the mainstream media, to whoever that new nominee is going to be. And so if you just play out the incentives, right? I'm not a big fan of conspiracizing or theorizing without fact, but just look at the actual incentives. And in the same way that an investor would, right? You have a business audience, I'm a business person, look at the incentives, play that out. I think it's a big part of why I've been vehement for over a year, even when it was considered to be a fringe conspiracy to say that Biden wasn't going to be the nominee. Just follow the incentives, and I would do the same thing now as well. I think doing this tomorrow may not be their best incentive, but doing this over the course of the next 4 weeks, maybe even after the Republican National Convention, after that cake is baked, yeah, that seems like a reasonable period when Biden's end of his candidacy may come near.
I think Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to have one more final debate. Obviously, Donald Trump's going to win again. It's going to be something similar to the first one. And then the Democrats are going to have to sit down and say, all right, he's out. We're bringing in somebody new. And just as Vivek said, they're not going to have enough time to properly criticize this candidate. Because if you're only on the ballot for like a month and a half, how well will the average voter truly know this person? They probably won't. And if these Trump haters out there are left with two options, Donald Trump or somebody who they're not too familiar with, you know they're going to pick the latter 10 times out of 10. So I think that's what the Democrats are banking on.
Calling that he is going to drop out. You predicted the time frame was going to be in 2 to 3 months. You said that in November. Obviously, it's been a little bit longer than 2 to 3 months, but is that because, going back to your last answer, because Democrats, you believe, are incentivized to keep him in the race as long as possible?
I think there was certainly no urgency to it. And I also think that that was part of why many in the Democratic establishment agreed to this debate. Not only did they agree to the debate, they effectively called for it. This was the earliest presidential debate in U.S. history. Never has there been a televised debate this early. And it's the only one that's ever taken place before the nominating convention of either party. Why do you think they went out of their way to demand that as a condition for a debate for the first time in American history? It's obvious. That was supposed to be Biden's final test. He failed it. I was saying that in the lead up to the debate, that was dismissed as a theory for why they scheduled the debate. It seems obvious now in retrospect. And so my only point is, I think that I say this less to congratulate myself on being right about some prediction, but the reality is anybody who found themselves surprised by Biden's performance, by Biden's lack of mental acuity, and by the Democrats' ready willingness to now swap him out, certainly in the media establishment, should ask themselves, if the public institutions in the media and in the political establishment lied to you for that long about that, what else are they lying to you about as well? And just to be skeptical for people to seek the truth by tracking incentives and analyzing the situation on their own, rather than just swallowing what they're forced by.
I don't care what anybody says. Trump needs this man and it's his VP. This guy is sharp, he's articulate, and he knows what's coming before it actually comes. Trump has that same ability. These two guys are two peas in a pod. We need them together. But yeah, regarding the Democratic candidate, who do you guys think? Who are they going to throw up there as Donald Trump's competitor? I honestly have no idea where this is going to go. If I had to guess, I'd say Michelle Obama. But if you think about it, there's actually no solid, good Democratic candidates out there. The only Democrat who I kind of liked were Robert F. Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard. The rest are kind of bought and paid for, and I don't really trust any of them. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this down below. Who's going to be the Democratic candidate, and will they replace Joe Biden? And if they do, when will that take place? Will it take place a month before the election? Will it take place 2 months before? Or will it take place next week? Let me know your thoughts on this down below. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to smash a like, comment, subscribe, and I wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.